Okay, we've already gone through the first 5 of our 10 commandments of your rights as a photojournalist. Now let's wrap up with the last 5. And we start with this one, which is just a general warning to not fall victim to popular myths about where you can be, where you can't be, and what you can and can't take pictures of. The first 5 of our commandments sort of talked about this already. We talked about the fact that you can be in a public space taking pictures. Of course, if you're asked to leave, you have to go, but you have the right to be there to start with. You have the right to take pictures of people if they're in a public space. You don't have to ask their permission. But the problem is that the world is full of myths, and these myths get passed along from photographer to photographer or from person to person. And so it's important that we understand how to address these situations when they arise. So, for example, like you can be at a playground, which is a public space, taking pictures of kids if you want to. You don't have to ask their parents' permission. But, maybe sometimes you consider the ethical background of it and think about, hey, maybe you should ask permission. Maybe you should make sure it's okay first. But that's just one of the myths, right, that will always get passed around. People will talk about how you can't take pictures of kids in public, but that's simply not the case legally. It's an ethical consideration, but not a legal consideration. I've heard, interestingly, in the past, some myths about how you can't take pictures of bridges. There is no law in the United States banning taking pictures of bridges. You are open to take as many bridge pictures as you want. We've already discussed in this little section that one of the bigger myths that is perpetuated even by people who work in airports in the TSA, that you can't take pictures in an airport or you can't take pictures of the security checks when you absolutely can. And there's even some myths that have unfortunately been perpetuated because of some laws that have been passed, more on that in a second, that you can't film or take pictures of police, and you absolutely can. That is well within your rights to film or take pictures of police. But these are myths that get perpetuated by the institutions in society that don't want you to take their picture, and those get passed along by everyday people. So remember, as a photographer, you have to stand above all that. You have to know your rights, and you have to actively participate in protecting your rights. That leads us to number 7, and that is that if you're challenged, you don't have to explain why you're taking pictures, nor do you have to disclose your identity. If someone ever asks you, hey, why are you taking a picture of this? Why are you out here being a photographer? What story is this going to end up being for? You don't have to tell anybody anything. You're just acting as a photographer. You don't have to explain yourself. Now, that said, don't go against journalistic ethics. Don't lie. Don't say that you're there for some reason where you're really not. Don't manipulate people into making them believe that you're working on one type of story when you're really working on another. You have to keep everything honest. But that said, if you feel like you're being harassed, if you feel like you're being unfairly challenged, if you feel like you're being targeted at all because of your position as a photojournalist, you don't have to give any more information than you feel comfortable giving. But I want to stress the point here is that there is no magic in journalism. Simply being a journalist or being a photojournalist, professional or otherwise, doesn't give you any more powers. You don't have no more rights that are extra if you're a journalist or a professional photojournalist. Anybody with a camera has the exact same rights as everybody else. These are not exclusive to photojournalists. These are rights for everybody, which means that the rights to be in a public space and take photos, the rights to take photos of people in public spaces, all of this has to do with the rights of all people, not just photographers. And that can get tricky sometimes because not everybody understands that these are not rights specific to photojournalists. And so you may be responding to a police situation, or let's say you're a photographer taking pictures of a crime scene that has occurred. The police may put tape up, caution tape, around a certain area. And unfortunately, the way it works is police may say, hey, if you're media, we'll let you pass the tape and let you come take pictures of what we're doing in the crime scene. The unfortunate part there is, again, journalists are not meant to have any extra special rights that other people don't have. If you're a citizen or just a regular photojournalist or citizen photojournalist, you're supposed to have the same amount of rights as everyone else. So the book, one of the best things I think this book does is suggest, if you're going to be serious about citizen photojournalism or freelance photojournalism, or if you just want to be a photographer, make yourself a press pass. Fire up Photoshop or InDesign and find a template online for a press pass and lay it out. Use a picture of yourself, put the word press at the top. You can call yourself freelance, or just call yourself a photojournalist on the press pass. Press passes are not legally binding. They're not magic. They're not licenses. They're not bestowed by any sort of meaningful agency with any sort of power. They are simply a way to quickly identify photographers. And if you're going to be a photographer, that's fine. That you don't have to work for somebody in order to have a press pass. Fire up InDesign, make your own. This is something I did when I was being a freelance photographer, and it really was useful. Make it look nice. I would suggest get it printed off on good paper, and then if you don't have access to one, take it to like a FedEx shop or a Office Max or something and get it laminated so it looks nice. It'll keep it dry, keep it away from anything that'll damage it. Get like a lanyard clip and attach it to your gear, or attach it, just make sure you wear it when you go out. But if you want to make it easy on yourself, one of the easier ways to do that is to make yourself a press pass. And remember, press passes are not magic. But be upfront. This is a really good point, is that if you're working as a journalist specific for a publication, if you're shooting for a story, be clear with that. But don't let that be the reason that you're excluded or that you're treated special. You should embrace the rights that you do have, but you should understand that these rights apply to everyone, not just to you. Number 8, now we start getting into some of the consequences of some of the things we've talked about earlier. In both Part 1 and Part 2 of the Know Your Rights section, we talked about how photojournalists have a habit of getting hassled because cameras are very obvious. It can feel intrusive to people when you take their photos, and so photojournalists have a habit of getting hassled. So here's how you handle that. And that brings us to point 8. Civilians, aka not police, have almost no right to detain you against your will, and they can be sued or arrested for criminal charges if they harass you. So essentially what I'm saying here is that people can't harass you, or people can't take your stuff. You can get kicked out of places, like we talked about in Part 1 and Part 2. If you're in a public space taking pictures, let's say a mall, you're in a public space taking pictures, you are legally able to do that. Now, if security walks up to you and says, hey, no photos here, you need to leave, you have to listen to them. If you don't, then you'll be trespassing and you'll be in the wrong. But they can totally ask you to leave. Now, what they can't ask you to do is to wait. They can't say, hold on, you need to stay right there. You need to wait. We need to check out your stuff. We need to see what you were doing. We need to detain you. Private security, aka hired security largely for businesses, stuff like malls. You'll see them sometimes in large shopping centers. They have no authority to detain you or to tell you to do anything other than leave. That is where their power ends. So if they tell you to leave, you need to leave. But if they tell you that you need to hold on and answer questions, you don't need to do that. You can just leave. If at any point someone, whether it's just a regular old citizen or whether it's hired security, if you feel threatened, at that point you need to call police. Don't put yourself in a dangerous situation where people who may not know what the rights of photojournalists are is going to get angry with you or is going to threaten you in some way. If someone starts getting in your face, do know that according to the law, then they have assaulted you. Any sort of verbal threat, anything that makes you feel threatened is assault. So try to document as much of it as you can and pass that information along to the police, and they may ask you at some point if you want to press charges against the person. In the same way that if they touch you or if they touch your camera gear, let's say you're taking pictures and they come up to you and they grab the camera out of your hand, they have committed battery, which is considered a violent crime and is much more serious. In that case, try to get as much evidence as you can about what happened, pass it along to the police, and if you feel like it, you'll be able to press charges. That leads us to number 9, which is that you never, ever, 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 ever have to hand your camera or your memory card or any of your storage devices or any of your gear or your gear bag or any lens or anything over to anybody, including the police, unless they are police and they have a warrant for that stuff. This counts for the police or private citizens, private security, anything. They're not allowed to touch your camera, your recording devices, your camera bag, anything. They are not allowed to touch your stuff. They are not entitled to view your photographs. I've seen this happen before too, where someone who is doing private security or even police will walk up to a photojournalist, start harassing them, and then say, "Look, I need to see the pictures that you took. I need to see what you took pictures of." And sometimes if you don't know any better, your thought may be, okay, well, look, if I just show them the picture, then that'll get them off my back. That almost never actually works. What's going to happen is they're going to look at the pictures and then yell at you to delete stuff. And in that case, they've already got your gear in close proximity and you're running a risk there. So you politely say no. No, thank you. I'm not going to show you the photos I've taken, and I'm not going to hand you my camera or any of my gear. Be polite about it, but at this one you really want to be forceful on, because this is your property. The physical property that you own in your camera, and the intellectual property, which is the photographs you've taken. If they take anything by force or if they threaten you, they're going to be liable for things like theft, coercion. Even law enforcement, even police officers need a warrant, which comes from a judge, comes from a court, and even they need that to get your stuff. So if a police officer asks to see your camera or see your camera bag, it's important that you insist that you see a copy of a warrant that makes them able or legally able to do that. Insist on that. And police officers have in the United States been charged with theft and have criminally been prosecuted for taking memory cards, because that is theft of property as well as theft of intellectual property, because they now have possession and can destroy the photographs that are on it, which for you as a photojournalist is your ability to make money. There's been some cases in the United States so far that have been heard by the Supreme Court about access to gear, access to cameras, access to pictures. Largely they have sided on the side of the photojournalist, but cell phones have made this, and smartphones have made this increasingly trickier to sort of figure out. There was a 2014 case called Riley v. California, and I promise it's not me. And the holding in this case said that police cannot search electronic information off of a cell phone, even if someone has been arrested, unless they have a warrant specific for the phone. And the precedent this sets is that whether you're using a smartphone or using a DSLR camera or a point-and-shoot camera, whatever it is, let's say the police arrest you. They're angry that you are taking pictures of something they don't want you taking pictures of, and they arrest you. The simple process of the arrest itself does not give them the ability to look through the photos or the videos that you have taken up to that point. They need a specific and special warrant for that. So that opens it up for lawsuits if they do that. And those lawsuits have been challenged and been put forward by the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which is an organization that has been good to and for journalists in the last few decades. And it's important to note that, again, not only can they not just look through your stuff, nobody, including the police, can delete photographs off of your camera without your permission. Even if a police officer has a warrant from the court signed by a judge that says they can look at your stuff, they cannot delete the pictures without your permission. No one has any ability to force you to do that except for you. And finally, number 10. is that you have to go into photojournalism if you're going to do this, understanding that even high-ranking people, even well-known photojournalists, even photojournalists working for professional companies like the AP, working for the New York Times, even famous photographers are going to have to deal with getting harassed. They have to deal with getting challenged by people who are saying they don't have the right to take pictures where they are, even though they know they're legally in the right. They're still going to get challenged and harassed. We saw this quite a bit in the last couple years, especially in large-scale police protests in Ferguson, Missouri, for example. A good number of wire photographers shooting for Reuters, for the Associated Press, were arrested by police for taking their pictures. This is a Reuters photographer. This is an AP photographer. They are professionals. They're pros. They are people with decades in the business taking pictures, and they're still getting arrested. None of them were very seriously charged because they were in the right. Interestingly, in this photograph, what's actually happening is the photographer on the left is handcuffed, is being handcuffed by police for taking pictures not on the sidewalk, but again, we understand that's not actually against the law. This is a wrongful arrest. But the photographer is handing his cameras over to the photographer on the right, who isn't actually arrested, and he's going to take the gear to make sure that no one deletes any photographs off of it. Here's a life lesson for photojournalists, in that, let's say a police officer is attempting to violate your rights as a photographer, and you are familiar now with your rights as a photographer, where you can be, what you can take pictures of, who you can take pictures of. The best thing to do, number one, you need to stay calm. You need to not panic, don't raise your voice, don't freak out, stay calm. And the sort of magic sentence here is to ask, can I go? Can I go now? If they say, yes, you can go now, that means you're not under arrest, get your stuff, go somewhere else. It's better in that situation if you are close to being detained, if you're close to being arrested, depending on how you want to challenge it. I think it's better sometimes just to go find a different angle for the photo. But if they say, no, you cannot leave, then you have been detained. You are in the process now of being arrested, which has its advantages and disadvantages. It's hard to think about getting arrested in terms of having an advantage, but the one advantage that being officially detained and being arrested has is that now that it's up to the police to justify why they detained you. And in the case for a photojournalist, oftentimes there's really no case. There's really no proof at all, and so you end up being let go after a couple of hours, and you have the ability then to countersue the police department if you feel like it. That photojournalists do it all the time, and photojournalists have been successful at countersuing police departments for being wrongfully detained. If you're in this process, if you feel like your rights are being violated, especially by people of authority in society like police, make sure you get as much proof about what's happening as possible. This used to be hard to do, but nowadays we all have video recorders in our pocket. So if you feel like your rights are being violated, pop your phone out of your pocket, hit video record, and start recording what is happening to you. There's been some laws that have been passed in the recent years that kind of sound like they are making it illegal to take pictures of or record police. And they have been largely pushed and supported by police who don't want people taking their pictures. But if you look at the actual wording of the law, almost always what they do is say that the police have the right to order you away from a scene or arrest you if you're interfering with legitimate police duties. In that case, if police start to wave you back from somewhere or tell you to move or tell you to get back somewhere, make sure you know what the laws in your area are. It's usually not the worst idea to at least comply somewhat initially, and if you feel like it's being done just out of spite to keep you from getting the picture, then you need to look at what the laws specifically are in your area. But nowhere is it illegal to take a picture of a police officer. What it is illegal to do is interfere with the police duties in the process of taking pictures. But the big thing to remember, no matter what happens, is be smart about what you're doing and stay calm. know what your rights are, know how you're going to challenge and support your own claim to your rights, and be smart about it. Freaking out, yelling at people, raising your voice has really not done a whole lot to help when photojournalists have been challenged on this. What you have to do is stay calm and be smart about it. And now that you know your rights, I hope that you never actually have to use them. I hope that you're never actually seriously challenged. But if you are, you're now armed with the knowledge of how to protect yourself and legally where your rights actually do lie.